Today's guest is someone that I've been genuinely, and I confess to him that I was ecstatic to have him sharing this space with us. So, Tez Steinberg, let me just a brief bio Tez. Tez is a solo ocean rower, an endurance athlete, and the founder of the United World Challenge. He's rowed thousands of miles across the ocean alone to raise awareness for ocean conservation. But his story is not just about crossing oceans, it's about crossing thresholds. And that's what we're here for. Without further ado, Tess, thank you again for being here. Anything that you would like to say before I start with a couple of questions?
Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love what you guys are doing. I think it's really important to have teams who not only are providing solutions, but believe in those solutions and are helping up level the important impact work happening around the world. So glad to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. So, Ted, first question, and I have already shared some of your bio with the thresholders here. And so what sparked that journey of yours? I mean, what pulled you into this mission? I mean, not everybody willing to take such a challenge of rowing solo across the ocean. So tell us, what brought you there?
It's not a normal decision that most people would make by any means. I decided to row across an ocean in 2016, and I thought this is something I could maybe do in a couple of years. I had no idea just how involved the process would be even before getting to the ocean. But it was really a deep desire that came from realizing life is short and wanting to do something really special with my life. And sometimes that kind of realization follows a big life event, sometimes a tragedy. In my case, in 2016, my father died, and he actually died by suicide. And after he died, I started reflecting on what I wanted to do with my life. Also, immediately after that event, kind of wanted to be alone. And rowing across an ocean is pretty alone. But I knew, it would take some years to pull it off. And over the course of this journey to and across the ocean, I could turn the project into more than just my own quest for healing and my own quest to process what had happened and turn it into something greater. And following that idea, I founded a nonprofit called the United World Challenge. And it was under that banner that I did my first row in 2020 from California to Hawaii. And then last year did my second row from Hawaii to Australia. And it grew out of this personal event and really wanting to do something special, and turned into something that could involve other people and other communities and make a difference in the world.
Wow. Thanks for sharing this. And I suspect that while being alone in the ocean, besides facing storms and silence, your own, what did this experience teach you about yourself?
A lot of things. So in total, I spent, 6 months alone at sea. A lot of those days look like, they look very similar, some of those days. But there are days that are also really unique, and you have this moment where there's a little bit of an awakening and clarity. And with any intensive experience like that, with any big life change, it's not just the event, it's the integration afterwards. And so while I have different realizations and things that feel true in that moment at sea, the real journey that I'm on now after completing these expeditions is to integrate those things. Because we can learn something about ourselves, but not necessarily take action on it completely, right? So I'm someone who strives and pushes himself and wants to constantly grow. Well, there's a shadow to having a growth mentality. And that shadow is always looking at something from the lens of what you can do better and never being satisfied, right? And setting the bar constantly further. You reach a certain objective, and so now you just move the goalpost and aim a little bit further. And it is a framework that allows me to continually grow and improve, and means that it's a challenge to feel some sense of satisfaction with what I do. And so that's one thing that I continuing to work on, because at the end of the day, this was inspired by my father's death and the question of how do I make life count? And if this was my last day on earth and I'm simply striving for tomorrow, well, what am I doing to enjoy today? So that's kind of the edge for me, is having this both and.
I'm just reading out the comment. I read Hector saying that what's next question seems interesting to answer from your perspective.
Yeah, of course. It's a very, obviously everyone always wants to know what's next. And they often assume it's another great big adventure. But I think for me, the big adventure right now is one, like I just suggested, kind of integrating some of these lessons. If you go straight from one expedition into the next, or one great life challenge into the next, and don't actually allow time to integrate from it, then you're missing a lot of the point and the value. So before I rush into some next big expedition or huge project, I'm taking some time to integrate from this past journey. I've also learned a lot from 6 months at sea. I don't plan to do any more rowing myself. So I'm starting to coach someone. The boat is still a fantastic boat, and I'm coaching a rower. He's not a rower. I wasn't a rower either. I'd never been to sea. I wasn't a rower before I started this project. So I'm coaching someone to become a rower and do an expedition next winter that will raise funds in action for human connection and addiction recovery. So transitioning from athlete into coach and doing keynote speaking to inspire people and to find their own ocean and the courage to cross it. And I want to learn to sail and take other people out to sea in the years ahead.
Much faster, yes.
Yeah, faster, smarter, for sure.
I see some hands up. Carmen.
Hi, Tez. Thank you so much for your time. Very excited to have you here as well. I'm very grateful. I'm wondering if your coaching and what the coaching you received includes both mental and physical. I would imagine so. And what's the balance between that?
Is your question, Carmen, about what I receive or what I'm offering to this person who's preparing? Yeah.
Both.
Yeah, it is very much both. So preparing for these expeditions, worked with a bunch of different people, physical trainers and coaches. And that's what people assume a lot of your attention goes into preparing for an ocean row. Spending months alone at sea. There's no support boat, no chase boat. I have to bring everything I need from start to finish. And that includes, medications, injury prevention, all these things. So people think it's a lot of time in the gym. There is a little time in the gym, and working with coaches from a fitness and strength and conditioning perspective helps. But at the end of the day, in the middle of the ocean, when you're rowing, everybody gets tired. Doesn't matter how fit you are, you're going to get tired. And what's going to break then is your mindset. And so from that perspective as well, the coach I've been working with for a couple of years was very helpful in the second expedition. In times where I was looking at everything from a very scared and pessimistic perspective, he helped me reorient and see a little bit of possibility and keep an open mind. And so working with coaches, I'm in a men's group that meets every week and having their perspective on how I navigate challenges in life before and during and after these expeditions is super helpful. So, it's a bit of a misleading thing to look at the boat and see just me, because in reality, there are a lot of people involved in this from many different angles.
Hard to imagine.
Juan, over to you.
Tess, unbelievable. I just posed one of the pictures because I really got curious about, what your boat is and what it looks like, and maybe how do you actually prepare that design and what technology is involved there. Also, I wanted to talk or ask you some questions around your preparation. Sounds like you already addressed those ones, right? Sounds like it's physical, but also, you got a lot of supporting people. If you can also share some light around the emotional side, right? How do you prepare yourself, right? Because 6 months in the ocean, right? It's gotta, I'm sure you knew going into that situation, how long would it take you to get there, right? And then maybe how do you approach preparing mentally, right, for that situation? Anyway, too many questions, but I guess what is the technical side on the boat and technology, and probably ultimately, ultimately, what a normal day will look like in the ocean, right? When you're within those 6 months, what will be your routine in that cycle?
Sure thing. Thanks, Juan. So, question one is a little technical orientation to the boat. So the boat is a 7-meter long carbon fiber rowboat. It has 250 watts of solar, I believe, 200 amp hour battery bank. That powers all my navigation, communication equipment, as well as a desalinator. This is the most important piece of equipment on board to produce drinking water. I carry about 200 liters of emergency water in the event either of my water makers broke. It is an emergency supply as well as ballast. And that ballast, together with how the boat is designed and these two airtight cabins up top, mean that the boat is generally very stable, shouldn't capsize, but if it did capsize, it should self-right. In other words, as long as I'm attached to this boat, we should be able to complete this crossing. It's just a matter of buckling up and tolerating. And in general, what I learned on the ocean is the boat has a much higher tolerance for chaos and rough conditions than I did. And I would mentally struggle much sooner than the boat would. It's not to say there weren't challenges along the way, but it was more a question of figuring out how to fix them rather than the boat actually being able to continue. So that's question one around the technical component. A day in the life, it would vary a little bit based on conditions, but in general, I would try and row in shifts and lasting anywhere from, 2 to 4 hours at a time. In between shifts, use the bathroom, have a bite, send messages. I might take an hour and create some content. I'm sending back photos and videos and blogs to my team on land, who then put that onto social media and use that to raise donations. And so different activities like that in between the rowing shifts. On average, would row on a shorter day 10 hours, on a longer day 14 hours, in that range, and then try and sleep at night. But that would, again, very much depend on conditions. There are times where, might have to be awake for 24 or 36 hours, navigating around islands and other particularly difficult areas. And so you have to be very adaptable and flexible, and sometimes, put in a long day. Remind me, Juan, please, your second question, which I'm going to answer third.
Yeah, I think it's more around the emotional preparation, right? What do you do knowing what you were getting into, right? What will be that side of your preparation?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. There are two main ways, and they seem in conflict with each other, in part because on the one hand, you do prepare. On the other hand, there's only so much preparation you can do. And you just have to compartmentalize, right? Because there's no way to simulate being alone on a rowboat in the middle of the ocean, right? You can do certain things to prepare. So like one of the things I did ahead of my first row was I took a week to do a silent meditation retreat. And part of the difficulty of that is the feeling that I was very behind on this project. I know what I need to do to prepare technically, raising donations, organizing equipment and logistics, storytelling, sponsorship, all these things. Like my to-do list is super large, and sitting for a week and not doing any of that was emotionally difficult. But that's actually a great way to simulate the discomfort of being at sea when very little is out of my control. Very little is within my control, right? So actually saying, okay, I want to be doing all of these things, but surrendering, saying I'm not going to actually deal with any of them. I'm just going to sit here in the discomfort of it for a week, was actually a pretty good simulation. At the same time, it's really just focusing on what's within my control when I am preparing, and trying to stay aware of the difference of what's within my control, what's outside of my control. It's really that awareness piece, right? That emotional awareness piece, which is easier said than done. But every day is kind of an opportunity to try to practice that, because that's really the most important thing out there, whether it's slowing down and taking some breaths, or reorienting through an affirmative phrase, whatever it might be. In the first row, it was really looking at the ocean and admiring how beautiful it was, would help me step out of the story that I'm stuck, I'm never going to make it, all the different stories you get caught up in, and instead just be like, wow, it's really beautiful out here. At least I get to admire that, and I'll just focus on admiring that today and not worry about if or when I'll ever make it, right? So there are different things to try and get present and regulate my emotions a little bit. Again, easier said than done. And sometimes, you got to phone a friend and ask for a little help.
Wow, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's one last question for you. How scary,
okay.
I'm sorry, Alex, how scary is being in the middle of the ocean at night without any light, probably pitch dark? How scary is that?
It depends. If you ask me in the first week of the first row, it was pretty damn scary. But by the end of the first row, I loved it, right? And that's partly why I went back out for a second trip. But when I started the first row, I'd never been to sea. I left during the height of the pandemic. And as a result, instead of having weeks and months to train on my boat, I ended up with time to just train for 3 days. And so when I rowed away from California, I was a complete novice. And that first week, everything was so disorienting. Within the boat, out in the ocean. And I kept the light on outside on my deck for like a week, telling myself that it was for safety purposes, so other boats could see me. There's no other boats around. That little light is not going to make a difference. Any boat in the area is not going to pay attention to like this flickering little candle. They're not going to see it. And so after like 10 days, I was like, dude, turn off the light. You're being scared of the dark, And I turn it off, and then I noticed the sea is all lit up with all this bioluminescence, which I was missing out on, And so then I start seeing, okay, actually the ocean at night is really cool. It is condition dependent. When the waves are raging and the wind is howling and it's raining, being outside at night is terrible. But when it's calm, it's absolutely stunning.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tez.
For sure.
Alex.
Thanks, Juan. So Tez, 6 months alone, first of all, sounds absolutely fantastic. Though I'm guessing the challenges that you've described are very, very real. 2, Tez is a cool name. Curious if there's a story behind that or not. But my real question is, I try and do something big every year. A couple years ago, I traveled to the Northwest Territory of Canada. Took a long time to get there. We went fishing on Great Bear Lake. And so fishing is a lot of like that, right? You're just kind of like in the moment, just doing the thing. Your mind wanders. I got to this one really special moment in my trip where I felt like people were kind of watching me in this area. The trees were just set up in a certain kind of way, and I had this kind of spiritual experience with the lake. Come to find out, that's the area, the deepest part of the lake. There's a legend in indigenous people's folklore that the heart of the lake is there, and there's big fish swimming around it, protecting nature, and it's a wonderful story. And I'm curious if there's, I tell that story because I'm wondering if in your journey, the first one, what was a moment that maybe you can share that might have been something that you could, see as a similarity to my story?
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate that. That's a unique question. I haven't gotten that one before. So, and the two journeys were very, very different in all aspects, but especially in relation to this question that you're posing. In the first row, when I set out, having never been to sea, it was so disorienting and very intimidating for a while, right? And especially because getting away from the continental shelf, conditions continue to be fairly chaotic. You don't have sort of coherent seas. The wind and waves are going different directions. If they're going the same direction, they're opposing my desired direction of travel. Only after a month that I got off the shelf and had more supportive conditions heading towards Hawaii. And as I got those more coherent conditions and started to really connect with this experience, I felt as though the ocean was actually helping me. And in terms of current and wind and waves, it's easy to come to that conclusion. We were all going the same direction. Fair enough. But on a more, spiritual level, it really felt like, hey, I'm on this mission and it's really trying, like we're on the same team and it's helping me get there. And as I went farther and farther, that felt super true to me. And there's this one day where while I was watching nature unfold around me, it all kind of clicked. When I first set out, I didn't know how to make peace of these different things. Like when you're on a fishing trip and you first go out there in a new environment, you don't know what a bird is doing when it goes on a particular flight. You don't know why a fish swims the way it does. But when you observe for months, you start piecing this together. And that's what happened. As I first see, as I'm rowing and I'm rowing facing backwards, a bird swoops down past my shoulder. And now I know, a couple months into this row, when a bird swoops low, look at where it's flying, it's probably chasing some fish. So then I see it's chasing flying fish soaring through the air. And now I know if the fish are also leaping out of the water, they're trying to get away from bigger fish beneath the water. So then I see these pompano dorado chasing the flying fish. And then I see mahi-mahi chasing the pompano dorado. And I see this whole scene unfold around me, and I can hear like David Attenborough in my head narrating it. And all of a sudden it kind of clicks, right? This whole ecosystem supporting itself and all these different organisms that ultimately are just ocean water. Like, how did they get here? Where did those elements come from? Like, it's all just water in a different form. I have this really powerful experience of just being able to witness this awesome scene unfold. And that feeling stuck with me throughout the rest of this first expedition. And part of why I wanted to do a second row and focus the second row on ocean plastic specifically. All right. The first row was really a mission to raise scholarship funds to a school that changed my life. And when I completed the row and was able to give scholarships to 3 students, that was awesome. But I felt like the ocean was this huge character in my journey, and it only got brought up occasionally in my storytelling. I was like, I want to do more for the ocean, and specifically ocean plastic, because it's affecting oceans worldwide. And so I set out on the second row, but these journeys were nothing alike. Just different water, different conditions, so many factors. And, in the first row I had that feeling that like the ocean has my back and is supporting me. And in the second row, it felt like if I'm not careful, the ocean will kill me right away. And not out of spite, not out of malice, not out of vengeance, like not for any anthropomorphized reason. It just will. It's chaos and dangerous. And if I'm not careful, I'll die here. And so, when coming back to the integration piece, like what I'm trying to do now is integrate these two very different experiences of like this very idolized, romanticized view of what the ocean is and what my experience was, and then just indifference, and kind of bring them together. So I don't have a neat answer to that, but all these things can happen.
That was beautiful.
Thank you, Alex. I think that Alex asked about your name, right? Tez?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mentioned I raised scholarships for an international high school. It was actually at that high school where I met a student from Australia, and she said Terrence is far too long. And so in Australia, we would turn Terrence into Terry, Terry into Teza, Teza into Tez. And since then, we got rid of 4 letters, and now it's just Tez.
Cool.
Thank you, Tez. Is there any questions from the audience? Please feel free to... Oh, okay. John? Sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you talked about the 2 trips being very different. I wondered if you'd be able to speak more to that, or some of the experiences that contrasted clearly between those 2 different expeditions.
Yeah, of course, John. Thanks. So the first row between California and Hawaii, there's no land between those 2 start and end points. And navigationally, that makes it much simpler. In the second row, not only were there islands and reefs and atolls that I would have to navigate around, there's also crossing the equator where there are counter winds, counter currents. It's a huge stretch of ocean, like 8,000 kilometers. And with that much time at sea, you're inevitably going to encounter bad conditions. It also meant, in order to have the least stormy season, it meant departing in what is the winter in the northern hemisphere, arriving in what is the fall in the southern hemisphere. And that meant short days the entire time. Those short days meant that I was generating less power with my solar system and consuming more energy because I had longer nights and because I was filming for a documentary film. And so all of this combined for really intense external conditions I was trying to manage and working with a margin of power of just a couple of days reserve battery at any time. And all of that created kind of an internal set of conditions in which I felt like I was living on a razor's edge and about to run out of luck at any moment. And as a result, there wasn't this flow state experience that I had in the first row. It was very much an experience of managing risks and managing what felt like crises on a day-to-day and hour-to-hour and minute-to-minute basis, pretty much for 4 months. And so although I saw tons of epic wildlife in the second row, it was kind of like I see it and then I move on because you got to keep moving. This isn't a safe place to be. It's kind of the experience I had. So what that did mean is when I reached Australia, I was very happy to get off the boat. And I've been trying to enjoy life since.
Thank you, Tez.
For sure.
I have a couple questions, Tez, and thanks again for being here. Simple question first. What did you eat when you were out in the ocean for so long, and how did you store like months and months worth of food? And then the second question is, did you ever have any moments on either of your expeditions where you kind of questioned what you're doing? You're like, well, why the hell am I out here? And if so, how did you get yourself back on track mentally?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second part. Yes, on a very regular basis, like from day one onwards. Part of the strategy with something like this for me is making it much bigger than myself, so that when I have those doubts and those fears and even want to quit, it gets really complicated, and it creates this accountability that I can just bail on a whim. And some of that accountability is social, from the commitments I've made to sponsors and partners and causes and film team and all these other components, people who are involved and invested in this. And then part of it is just logistically. You get out into the middle of the ocean, there isn't an elegant way to bail, right? And so it creates a set of conditions so that when those thoughts come up, because inevitably they will, not even just in the middle of the ocean, but like leading up to it, every day in Hawaii before setting out for the second expedition, I was like, what the fuck am I doing? This is crazy. This is stupid. Actually had a heart attack between my first and second expeditions, and I recovered from that heart attack to do the second row, and recovered well enough where my doctors gave me a green light to head out to sea again. But there's only so much you can do to remove the question of what would happen if this happened at sea, right? Like, it's not an overcoming the doubts as much as it is learning to live with them. And there are days where those doubts and those questions and those fears are really loud, right? And so if I had just said, well, I'm going to go do the second expedition for myself and only for myself, for sure I would have bailed leading up to it. I wouldn't have started the second row, right? But it's through all these other components that keep me accountable to doing it, even when I really didn't want to, getting in that the boat the second time. The culinary options at sea are not exactly the most appealing reason to do this either. So it's dehydrated meals. I packed 800,000 calories for the second row. Somehow that all fits in the boat. It's just dehydrated and shrink wrapped, tightly packed. And that all is packed in my deck on watertight hatches in my deck, and that was enough that I expected for 6 months at sea. In the end, it was enough calories for 6 months, but only enough variety for 4. And so by the time I reached Australia, I had eaten everything I was willing to eat. And the meals I had left, well, let's just say I'm never going to touch them again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hector, you are up next.
Yeah. Hi, Tez. Yeah, so just some fun questions. I think your way one would be, have you been back to the water since landing in Australia? Back to the beach. And the other one is, any other fun wildlife encounters that you would like to share? I love the description of the fishes and the jumping and all that. So, any other?
Yeah, thanks, Hector. The ocean's really cool. It's just rowing that's silly. So I went down to Baja, Mexico for winter to start working on my sailing certifications. And looking to do, a bunch more sailing, but not where I'm the captain, more where I get to be a crewmate. I'm not carrying all of the responsibility. I get to show up to shifts and learn, but not be the solely responsible party. So it's a little bit of enjoy the ocean without carrying all of the weight. But I still love the ocean and just try not to be in a rowboat. And other wildlife encounters, one of the coolest things was all the marlin marlin and sailfish that I got to see. They're such beautiful, beautiful fish. And there was one day late in the second drill where I was in the water swimming because I needed to clean the boat. Rowing is slow enough that barnacles and growth on the hull actually affect how fast I'm moving. And so I have to get in the water, preferably every week or two, but it was condition dependent when it was calm enough. So it might be 3 or 4 weeks before I can get in. I get in and the boat is covered in barnacles and algae, and I spent 2 hours scrubbing and scraping and cleaning all this stuff off. And when I first jump in, there's thousands of fish under the boat of all different types. Rainbow runners, skipjack tuna, golden trevally, pilot fish, like so many Samson fish, all these different beautiful fish, and 2 silky sharks, which were small, like a meter and a half. And they are intimidated by me, right? I'm a bigger animal. I get in the water, I'm holding dominant position at the surface. So as soon as I get in the water, the silky sharks dive, like 10 meters down below the boat. They want to stay as far away from me as possible. And I spend 2 hours cleaning the boat. When I'm just about done, all of a sudden I notice these 2 silky sharks are right next to me, like on my hip. And I'm like, oh, if they're not scared of me anymore, they're scared of something else. And so I look around and, I maybe should have had better situational awareness to have seen it coming. But, credit to them. This is what they do. A marlin had shown up and it was huge. We're talking like a solid 3+ meter marlin swimming behind the boat, looking for a way to make a meal. Thankfully, I had just finished cleaning the boat, so I just kept an eye on it. And when it got a little bit further away, I climbed back in. But it was very, very cool to share the water with a marlin because, the people who see marlins get to see them typically out of the water and bloody. And they are absolutely gorgeous fish to see in the water. That was really special. So, there's some cool moments like that.
Thank you for sharing that. That's
Sure.
Tez, is there a question you've never been asked that you've always wanted to answer?
No, I don't have one of those on hand, Dale. But I do. Yeah, I really enjoyed this Q&A though. So thank you.
Well, we have a few minutes left. So Tez, before we leave, definitely, I don't think not all of us are going to row across oceans. Oh, hold on. I see a hand up before I ask that question. Oh, go for it.
Thanks, Ida. So, Tez, you mentioned that you did not grow up rowing. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, wasn't a rower, wasn't a sailor. I'd never been to sea.
That's wild. So I grew up as a rower, and I texted all of my buddies, and I said, "What's the furthest you would ever row alone?" And one person said maybe a mile. So, I just think it's really funny because I was like, "Oh, maybe where do you row? Maybe a college or whatever." And I was like, I don't know if a single person I know that grew up rowing would do this or think about it. They would probably find other ways because it's been beaten out of us. But
for sure, yeah, no, I've heard that before, and I think it's one of those things where experience can kind of work against you because it defines how you interpret it. Really, rowing across the ocean and rowing crew have very little in common. One is an all-out exertion for a few to 15 minutes, and the other is a walking level exertion, ideally. Sometimes it's walking up a mountain in the rain with a heavy backpack and you take a couple steps up and you slip down. But on a good day, it's just walking. And, you'll get tired walking all day, but you can do it again the next day. And so it's kind of like that. So even though the mechanics on a basic level look similar, it's very different from the intense activity that is rowing.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I have done ocean rowing as a lifeguard, but that would maybe the first I ever went is 1.5 miles, and I cannot imagine doing any further than that. So kudos times, however many days you were out there.
Thanks, Paul.
I have one question, Zaida. Tez, do you find it hard to reconnect with planet Earth, not planet Earth, but with people, land, once you land? Like how long does it take you to get back on a groove of being able to be around people?
Yeah, so the first expedition, integration and adjusting to society was harder because I finished in a flow state and really wanted to keep going and was really loving the experience. And, I went like 8 weeks without even seeing an airplane, you know, over a month without a phone call. It was a very internal experience and was beautiful. And I came back and struggled to adapt to the noise of society because there's so many noises that we have to filter out constantly that are meaningless. The hum of a car that's not actually a threat to us, but sounds like it to our nervous system when we're not attuned to that on a regular basis. And there's constant stuff. So the first row was really hard adjusting back. The second row, I wanted to get off the boat, and the sounds of society and the smells and noise of a city were like, welcome. I was like, great. Bring it all. Like, I want to smell the sweet smell of a diesel engine, even though it's obviously bad for the environment. I'm like, it smells kind of good, so there's like a little bit of a kink in the safety of like society after what was a kind of traumatic second row. So the second time it was actually a lot easier to come back to land because I wanted to.
Thanks so much.
For sure.
I've got one more question for myself. It seems like you described the first row as like, this great experience, and the second row you had a little more appreciation for the ocean and how it might kill you, which is interesting that you didn't have that with the first expedition. That's not my question. My question is, did you almost die on the second expedition? Because it seems like maybe you had a closer brush with the power of the ocean or something. Can you talk to that at all?
Yeah, there were a few occasions where there were some extremely close calls. Somehow, I was able to make it through each of them unscathed. But, each time it's like, when is my luck going to run out? And so, yeah, it was a very different experience in terms of the risk and danger was not one was the perception, but was one of reality more so in the second row. And, so that was, flavored the experience very differently.
Thank you.
For sure.
As before we wrap up, some of us, we're trying to move through maybe fear or a challenge, or maybe we feel burned out. What advice would you give us, or to someone who wants to take a leap, but doesn't know where to start, right?
Yeah, thanks, Ida. So I think it's really important to remember that the first steps are often the hardest, right? You don't know the whole journey. You don't know the whole path. There isn't a map laid out for you. Trusting that the path will emerge as you start taking steps is really important. So it's first, take whatever that first step is. And ideally, it's something that you're drawn to naturally. Something that you actually personally want to do. Not something you have to do. Not some story of what you need to achieve, because that will just contribute to this burnout. Something you're genuinely curious about, And it was that genuine curiosity in me, wanting to experience what it's like to be at sea, is what allowed me to take a step, even when I didn't know how the journey would unfold. And remembering that the rate of change changes over time. In other words, the return on your investment, the return on your energy, your decisions, your patterns, your consistency will increase over time. When you first start out on this journey, you have this big goal. Maybe you know the goal, or maybe you just have a question. In either case, on day one, you're not going to get much return on that energy or that investment or what you're trying to do, because change happens logarithmically. It compounds over time. It's not linear. We think in a linear basis. Humans, we think linearly, but the world doesn't work linearly at all. It doesn't work that way socially, in economics, and ecology. Nothing is linear. It's on a logarithmic scale, an exponential scale. And what that means is initially when you start showing up and you start making decisions, you start making these investments, you're not going to see shit right away. And you're going to look at that and be like, it's not worth it because I'm not seeing any impact, right? That's where people give up. They don't see it to where you start having that inflection point and you start seeing a much bigger return, right? This applies across all areas of life, and why people will try something, see that they're not making any ground, and then give up. And the difference is people who can stick with it especially when they're not seeing returns, knowing that those returns will come later, because that change happens all on the back end of that curve. And so that's the question, is staying in the game through consistency, not intensity, but through consistency over the long run. That is what makes the difference. And so then it's a question of, how do you stay in the game, right? One, doing something you're genuinely curious about, right? Not because someone else tells you have to, or some external thing, something you're intrinsically motivated for. Two, focusing on the process rather than the outcomes, because the outcomes are going to be delayed, deferred. And if you're a growth-oriented person, the outcomes won't even matter at the end of the day anyway. Because you're just going to set a different goal for the outcomes. So trusting the process along the way and staying in that iteration cycle, because that is the journey. It's the journey, not the goal. And so the journey over time compounds, and then you'll start seeing progress towards that big goal or big question that you're working on.
Thank you, Tez. Thank you, Tez. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story, for being like a living reminder of what we're capable of, right? We're more capable of what we think. And when we connect with that curiosity, with that strength, with that purpose, we definitely are able to make amazing things happen. So thanks again for being here. I know that you will soon have a documentary release, right? So let us know.
End of the year.
We are looking forward to know about that.
Thank you so much, Syra. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for your awesome questions and attention today. And please feel free to stay connected. I'm Tez Steinberg on LinkedIn, and also Tez Steinberg on Instagram. So feel free to reach out and stay connected. And thank you again.